The SG553. Probably the most infamous gun in the game. One of the most underused guns and one of the most underrated guns. I would consider the SG553 to be the best assault rifle in the game, outbeing the AK by a large margin. And it seems like I'm someone who is in the minority for that opinion. A lot of people tend to think the AK is better than the SG for whatever reason. And some people may be thinking, well, the SG is obviously better than the AK, but I don't use it or whatever. Well, in my experience, the majority of people think that the AK-47 is better than the SG in terms of stats. And it isn't. And there are many reasons why, but one of the main reasons is the weapon spread on the SG. If you turn off weapon spread and recoil spread, well, just spread, first shot accuracy. What the frick is it called? If you turn off recoil inaccuracy and just normal inaccuracy, first shot inaccuracy, you would have bullets that always hit the same spot every time. And of course, that seems to be very common with the AK, is that the first bullet is always accurate. Well, the first two bullets are always accurate, and this is not the case. And it may be a little bit hard to see it from here, but these bullets are landing in a few different spots. I'll turn my infinite ammo on. And as you can see, the first two bullets that I shoot here are not in the same place. Now, if I move this target back a far distance, this is just going to make it much more easier to notice how inaccurate the AK is compared to the SG. Let me turn this off so it's much more clear. I'm going to aim at his head, around his head anyway. And I'm just going to tap here. That should be enough. Shot 15 times. Let's go. And as you can see, not all of these shots hit the head. Some of them were way off. Some of them hit the head, yeah, but then some just didn't even come close. And some of them hit his chest. Now we look at the SG553 here. And let's aim at his head here. There are 15 bullets. And as you can see, that's a much tighter grouping unscoped from the SG553. I didn't even use the scope there. Why is that? Because the SG is more accurate and has a lower spread than the AK. Now, if I use the scope here, it's going to be even more accurate. Okay, so I'm going to reset all of the bullets here. I'm going to use the scope and aim at his head this time. $15 bullets. And as you can see, all of those bullets hit his head. All of them. And on top of that, the accuracy on the SG is even better when you're crouched. It's better than the op when you're crouched. Whereas with the AK, even if we crouch with the AK here, reset. And obviously, I may not be on target with the AK because it doesn't have a scope. I can't zoom in to make sure where I am. But even without that, you can still see, even when crouched, the AK is far more inaccurate than the SG unscoped when standing. And is that worth $300? Absolutely. Like, let me just show you an example here. This is thus to it from pit, shooting at Goose with an AK. And some of these shots are really far off where I was shooting at. And despite both guns being a one-shot headshot, if the AK is this inaccurate and it misses, then what's the point of damage? It's like having an op that costs significantly less than the normal op, but it's much more accurate. It's like if you're aiming at the boxes, it could shoot the corner and Goose or something like that if you're aiming from pit. That's the comparison I like to make with the AK and the SG. Well, at least something like that, but you get the idea. Because the AK is so inaccurate, it makes the extra 300 for the SG just because of its accuracy worth it. Even if the SG was 3,500, I would still consider using it because, again, if I'm shooting from here and I'm missing because the AK is so inaccurate, what's the point of its damage? Sometimes I'll hit him, sometimes I'll get lucky, but it relies more on RNG than actually hitting the head. Even at medium range here, watch this. And while some of these shots hit his head, most of them hit his head, some of them, even at medium range, didn't hit. Whereas with the SG, I'm gonna reset here. I'm on this blue map, by the way, that's why I'm kind of judging from. For medium range, every single bullet hit his head. All of them. Whereas with the AK, maybe 33% missed at medium range. So it's not just because long range. The SG isn't just for long range tapping. It's also for medium range tapping as well. The only time that the AK actually excels at all is close range. That's it. Even then, the SG is still better, but for the extra 300, in that case, it's not worth it. But then you ask, well, what about spraying? Well, because the SG553 has a better spread, less recoil and accuracy, the spray pattern is going to be more predictable than the AK. For example, I'm going to reset here. I will turn off infinite ammo and reset. So watch this, watch this. I'm gonna spray at this wall here. Okay, that's one. That's two. That's three. And as you can see, just from these three, the pattern on the AK, the spray pattern on the AK deviates a good amount every time you do it. Here's one from closer range. See, even at close range, it does it. See, so it's gonna keep varying with the AK. That all guns do this, but the SG does it less. Watch this. All right, so I'm going to stand. Let's say here. Let's do it here. One. Two. And as you can see, the deviation between those two is not nearly as much as the deviations here. I'll move over a little bit more for this one. That's three. That's four. You get the idea. These are very identical. These are extremely identical. There's not nearly as much of a deviation here, as I said before, as there are in the AK spreads. So even when spraying, the SG is better than the AK-47. And that's unscoped as well. scoped, it's even better. And there's less of recoil here. It's when you're scoped, it's comparable to the M4A1S. Much easier to control. All you have to do is just get used to this pattern. If you take the time to get used to the pattern, then it's outclasses the AK in every way. Of course, there are things that are worse about the SG than the AK. I'll switch over to my monitor capture here so I can show you the raw data here. This is unzoomed in the SG. Obviously, it costs 300 more. Its max speed is 5 less than the AK, so it does make it a little bit harder for peeking, but the difference here is very minute. Reload time is 0.3 seconds more. That is bad, but you can compensate for it. You can learn to deal with it. I have. The damage is less, but because of the armor penetration, this less damage is nullified. The DPS is a bit less. But let's face it, does that really matter with the SG or the AK? It really doesn't. And you gotta keep in mind, this is going off damage. This is not taking armor penetration into account. So this is pretty much irrelevant. And the vertical recoil is just because, obviously, the gun moves up vertically when you're spraying it. But everything else is better than the AK. Again, this cancels out, this cancels out. This is basically irrelevant. But it has a better rate of fire, so you're going to kill people in less time. And, like I said, spread and recoil less. So, that's unzoomed. Again, let's go to zoomed here. Obviously, a max speed is less when zoomed. But when you're zoomed, all of these values go up. And if you don't believe me that the inaccuracy when crouched is better than the op, here's the op. Let's compare these two. I forgot to turn the zoom on. As you can see, even when zoomed in with the op, the inaccuracy on the SG is much better. Or the inaccuracy crouched is much better. Obviously, the move and the fire is going to be better. But even when standing, it's about the same as the op. If we turn zoom off, obviously it's less. But that's the raw data. And it even comes down to recovery time with the AK. With the AK-47, after you shoot, the recovery time before you can shoot again and have it as accurate as possible is less than the AK. And that's why the SG553 is better than the AK. And if you think the 300 price difference is a big factor in not buying the SG, you just don't know how to compensate for the price, I guess. I can compensate for it. I've used it enough to learn how to compensate for the 300 price difference. It's fairly easy. Simply, if you don't need to buy a nade, or if you can't buy a nade when you buy it, don't buy it. That's basically what I do. And if you want to just fully buy nades and armor, then just buy the AK. If that's what you want to do. But if you have enough money to buy the SG, then buy the SG. It's not like the 300 is going to make it's going to cause a huge problem, because you can still just buy the AK. It's not like once you start using the SG, you can only use the SG. In fact, I recommend that you use that when you're starting out, you still use the AK and learn how to use the AK, because you're going to find more AKs lying around. But then after you do that, go to the SG if you feel like learning it, because it is a much better gun than the AK, but a lot of people still decide to use the AK. But again, the price difference you can easily compensate for, and if you don't have the money, buy an AK. Just the same way as if you don't have enough money to buy an AK, you buy a Galil. It's the exact same thing. Only the price difference between these two and these two are much, much different. The only thing that may be difficult to learn, well, there are two things that may be difficult to learn with the SG. One, it's a completely different playstyle. You have to really, I wouldn't recommend going right into competitive with it, to be honest. Because the playstyle on the SG is very different because of its little, I guess you could call it gimmick. It's alternate fire mode, which is the scope. You have to learn how to use that. You have to know when to tap and when to spray. You have to, it's basically completely relearning how to use the AK. When you're using the SG, it's just a different play style. And the other thing is this recoil. Yes, in the beginning, it's going to be weird because it does this. It doesn't do the straight up and then left and right thing that the AK does. But just keep in mind, this is just a 7. With a little loop. You can learn it, it just takes time. See, it's not an impossible spray. Even when scoped, it doesn't go everywhere like people think it does. It's not completely random when it's scoped. It is completely manageable. Granted, I'm not the best at spraying in any circumstance, but still. If you can learn this pattern, then you can learn the SG's pattern. See. Anyway, that's enough of me blabbering. If you want to learn how to use the SG, use this map, Recoil Master Weapon Practice. Use your training map, maybe just use the SG from time to time when you're in the middle of practicing, warming up, whatever it is you do. And eventually when you feel comfortable with it, try it out in competitive. Although, just be prepared for the negative stigma to come out because this gun has, like I said, it's a very infamous gun. A lot of people hate it when you use it for whatever reason. Your teammates hate it, enemies hate it for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, it's still a better gun. And just because it has a scope doesn't mean it's a Call of Duty gun and it should never be used and it has no place in the game. That's not it at all. It has a scope because it's a secondary fire mode, much like the burst fire on the FAMAS or the burst fire on the Glock. It's just an alternate fire mode. That's all it is. You sacrifice movement speed for more accuracy and a better field of vision. Also, just like the op. The op does the same exact thing. It has a scope. You sacrifice movement speed for more accuracy and a better field of vision. It's the same exact thing. Just because it has there's a scope on an assault rifle doesn't mean you should never use it. It has no place in the game. It's just a gun that's more expensive than the medium tier AK-47, but it has more accuracy, and it's just an all-around better gun, but it just costs more. It's just like the comparison between the Galil and the AK. That's it. That's all it is. It certainly has a place in the game. Do I think that it needs a bit more balancing? Do I think that's kind of broken? Yes, I do. I absolutely do. It needs a price increase. Everything else about it is fine. It just needs a price increase for it to be balanced. But right now, it's broken. If that happens, then there's absolutely no argument as to it not being a weapon that should be in the game. Now, as for the AUG, oh, wow. I'll get into that in a different video.